Welcome to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. It's 2 in the morning on the East Coast of the United States. I have no idea what time it is down and under, but it is time for Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mecky. So I hope you have your tinfoil hat all made and cinched down tight over your ears. So take it away, Dave and Mecky.
Welcome to Shiny Side Out with
Dave.
There he is. And Mecky on WZZR, broadcasting from Australia for Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com, where it's more than just radio. So jump in the chat room if you can. And I just did, and I could. So that's good.
Yay.
This is show number 291, 190, and 200. We're going to talk about language. Not just language per se. We're going to talk about the proto-language, the original language, language confusion, maybe telepathy was the original language, and we're going to talk about mythology. And it's really, Dave, very interesting what our show notes have uncovered there.
It sure is.
It sure is. Now, it's on air, online, and on your smart device. So grab an app to listen anywhere or listen at home at a Grace Tabletop Digital Radio, and I'm sure there are going to be more coming out as well. If you missed Solaris' show, it only costs $5 a month to access the archives and check out her shows. So I think that's worthwhile. I think, Dave, did you get a chance to listen to her show?
No, the Bathurst 1000 is on, and I've been watching that all day, and there's still 30-something 6 laps left, and I've got to record it. So no spoilers, please, anyone.
I think the black team won. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
The team with a car.
The car won.
The car won.
That's right. I acknowledge, in my case, the traditional custodians of the land, which are the Daruk people. And in Dave's case...
Yeah, the Darkenjung people.
That's the ones. And we pay our respects to elders, past, present, and future. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in to what promises to be a very interesting couple of hours. If you're getting us on YouTube, do try to catch us live. If you do catch us live, come into the chat and take part in the conversation. Today, the chat is actually quite full, which is great. Fantastic. We could do a lot better, though, in the donation space. So, guys, this is Listener Funded Radio. If you have a spare dollar, this is a good cause to go to. If you like the content, not just from our show, but any of the other shows as well. None of it is corporately sponsored. Dave, how has your week been?
Oh, look, my week has been okay. Health-wise, yeah, very good. Family, yeah, great too. There's a Facebook page where I'm able to, I'm cleaning out. I had a holiday off, a week off work, and I posted some things. I hired a skip. I posted some things so that I could, just not sell them, but just say, look, there's something here to collect, take some photos of it, and most of it's gone. I'm still waiting for another couple of people to turn up and pick up some goods. This is, old children's things and, some home renovation stuff that we didn't use in the end. But look, my week was certainly punctuated by the research into the Las Vegas shooting. Horrible event, we can all admit. It saddens me to see death. I don't like it very much, and unfortunately, we're confronted with it every day. I've certainly had enough of it in my life. I don't need to see any more of it. However, there was a lot of very strange things about that event. One of those was there was muzzle flash. Now, I don't want to go too deep into it. I'm certainly going to keep researching and see what happens. But there was muzzle flash coming from some windows from different cams that suggest possibly more than one shooter. That's all I'm going to say about it. And because I don't want this to be non-monetized, I don't want it to be banned or deleted or whatever it is that it's been going on with everybody on YouTube.
You're right, Dave. I saw that actually a couple of our videos were flagged that way. and we have to go back. And I don't know why. One was I think time travel or the interdimensional travel or something.
Yes, it's so stupid. This Orwellian, culture that has come from nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because we're protecting you. Well, and how can you protect me from a viewpoint? It's a viewpoint. And Meki, I know you agree with me, and I'm making light of this. So, a terrorist can put up a video of a beheading, yeah, but I can't talk about it.
Yeah, that's
what?
odd, isn't it? That's
and
very strange.
news teams, news channels who have their own narrative are putting videos, live stream videos, and they're not getting taken down. They're still there. They're historical. And I've made some complaints. We've got a video that had, I don't know how many. It was like 70 views. It's just in our archive. And they said, we can't monetize it. It's not advertiser friendly. So, maybe, and it says under review. Now, it's been under review since June. How many times does it have to be reviewed? Even if it was a single person watching it, there must only be a finite amount of time where that remains under review. How can it still be under review? So I sent them an email. I said, the mighty YouTube, Google, Googleplex. I sent them an email saying, can you, why is it taking so long? And do you know what they said? Your video hasn't got 1,000 views, so we don't care. Right. It hasn't got 1,000 views a day, apparently, you need before they're going to take notice of it. But they're happy to do what they do. But it's not really an issue, you see, they said, because, you're not getting 1,000 views a day. I said, okay, well, what can I do? And there's nothing you can do. It's one-sided. I put it up there. Now, Meki, all of our 9/11 videos, all of them have been demonetized. And I know that there's one of them that says it's limited access. So you can't even watch it in some countries. Sharing it is not allowed. What? What?
Yeah. Look, it was only a matter of time.
What is? I know you're right, Meki, and that's why we call it 912 now, not 911.
The real number is 912 anyway.
That's a joke Meki and I have from The Simpsons. But this is the thing, is we did a show, ironically, Meki, the show about 1984 isn't demonetized.
Yeah, well, that's good.
That's funny.
The thing is this: most of this stuff would be automated and scripted, so there'll be bots, scrolling for keywords and phrases and whatever it might be, and danger!
Free thinking alert.
Young Will, this is a free thinking alert danger button. Quickly press it before there are more free thinking danger alerts. And before you know it,
Will Robinson.
That's the Will Robinson. That's one. Yes. Look, what can I say? It's. I expect more of it because there'll be less people involved in these audits. It'll be mostly robotic, meaning that it'll be scripted. It'll be automatic. It'll just be following some pre-programmed parameters, and then it'll just get worse.
But Meki, the next thing after that is, and there is quite a leap, but I'm going to still suggest it anyway because I think it's comical, and I think you have to laugh in the face of this kind of thing, right? And that is the next thing. There's a robot at the door saying, "Have you seen this person?" It's a photo of Sarah Connor.
Well,
right. Where the automated bots, in that Tom Cruise movie and everything, where you're arrested before you've done something, just because they trend you out to committing a crime that you haven't committed yet, right?
Actually, that's I listened to.
We have a segue to a news story about that too.
But there was an analysis done today. Not today. Sorry, I listened to the newscast about it on ABC Radio, and everybody in the world has something called a RUIN file. RUIN, RUIN, And the guy explained, so, people say, oh, all this information is out there. And if you have nothing to hide, then why do you care? Why do you care what happens with the information, right? Because you got nothing to hide. And so they did an analysis, and everybody has something to hide, something they're not proud of, something that could, ruin their careers. Everybody has something. Okay, so it doesn't matter who you are, and doesn't matter if you're law-abiding citizens, but there are things that are potentially damaging to you out there in the world, and therefore we need data protection. So, and to Dave's point, if we do automate it all, then a lot of that will fall away, and people will just let it happen because they think, well, you know what, I've got nothing to worry about. So, yeah, do what you want with the data. I don't care. You should care. You should care. The analysis has shown that all of us have a ruin file. Not a good thing. Now, segue away.
Segue away. Well, in New South Wales, the police have been able to use a connection, quite a good connection to face rec technology. Face rec technology is built into our photographic IDs. All of the driver's license or identity cards that are given out by the New South Wales, our state government, have always been and are face rec technology friendly. The actual photograph itself is a stereo photograph. They don't tell you that. They only show you mono. And you're asked not to smile. So the computer can get a flat face version of you and indeed create a smile on your face. And if you haven't seen that kind of technology, it does exist. In fact, it exists. It's so plentiful that you can do it on your home computer with a live video feed of someone with a camera looking at your face, and you can change their expression by making that expression on your face. Does that make sense? So if they're talking or they're not talking, you can sneer and it'll curl the nose and bring the lip up. You can lift one eyebrow, and that'll do that, say, on Donald Trump's live video feed. So they can, that's possible, and that's all part of this face rec technology. Now, face rec technology has been around for a while, but now what the federal government has said is, why should it take 2.5 weeks or whatever it was, this is his argument, for one of the states and territories to see someone who's not in their state on a camera and ID them. So he said, well, let's legislate it. So now they've got, millisecond access to the databases of all of the photographs of every person. And part of that legislation was to connect it to everything else. Because they've already got all the metadata license. So when you look at the timeline, it says, well, let's start collecting all metadata. And if you don't know what that means, it's not the meta tag at the top of the URL. It's everything you do. It's everyone you talk to. It's every post you make. It's every letter you type into a Google page. It's every letter you type in any search, anything you have to do with the internet. And your hardwired phones or your cell phone. Everything is metadata. It's not you, it's everything you do and everything you connect with and every word and letter you utter. Yeah? So that's what metadata is. Now, it's now mandatory for all of the ISPs to keep it for 7 years. Don't know how they're going to do that, because that's a lot of storage. But they're doing that. So that's the first hump of the timeline. Then the second hump of the timeline is, well, let's make it so that we can face rec everything. I mean, my phone has face rec in it. Yeah? Face recognition. If I'm taking a photo of someone, it detects a face and circles it. If you so choose, say with Facebook, if you're posting to Facebook, you can have a setting in Facebook where it says, if I recognize that face, do I permit Facebook to automatically tag the person in it? Even though I didn't say they're in it. Just a photo of some people. Now, I've said no, but that doesn't stop them from doing it anyway. That doesn't stop Facebook from having a list of photographs and pictures and images of you, whoever you are, taken by anyone on Facebook. But now the legislation in Australia allows, and they say, oh, it's not going to be used in any other way except for, for crime control. Sure, in the first minute.
Control.
Pre-crime control. But he said not for this project, I think he said. For this data connection project that they're talking about, he stayed on the level on that topic and ensured that he was only mentioning that topic. Now, that still makes me concerned about the bill that was passed or the legislation that was put through, because it does suggest that indeed everything is connected. Remember the government, all the government agencies, Meki, you'll remember this, they connected everything. They connected the Centrelink, which is the dole. They connected Medicare. Yeah. They connected all of the federal information, all of your health information, all of that is connected together now in a single place, in a single database, well, connectable. And now they've connected your photographs as well and the metadata. So this is all now one thing. It's one big bubble full of data, and you can run some big data stuff on that, and you'll find out a whole bunch of stuff on people. That includes your location of where you are. I talk about this quite a bit, and I try to get some people on board. And Meki, exactly that same phrase, and I'm going to hand it back to you now, and that is your friends say, I don't care. I don't do anything wrong. I bet you do. I bet you've done something wrong. And like Meki said earlier, that career-limiting thing, that photograph of you at that party, whoever it is, I'm not singling anyone out.
Yeah, right? Bob. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, you. Bob, you know who you are. And that could, at some point in the future, say you wanted a political career. Good luck with that. Unless you're so squeaky clean that no one has anything on you, would you even attempt it today?
Yeah.
Because right now, our poor politicians have, dual citizenship they didn't even realize they had. And of course, that disqualifies them. It should disqualify them from running. But they've been able to get around that and stay in Parliament, Meki, which is against the rules. Yes. It's like the Obama birth certificate, right, Meki?
Well, look, there are rules and then there are rules, right? So, like George Orwell wrote, all animals are created equal, and some animals are more equal than others, and that's just the way the world runs, right? There are always ways around it, and special dispensations, and extra rulings, and look, you don't quite understand what's going on, you stupid people, so shut up. But look, it's I'm not really surprised by any of it. Sorry, but there are a couple of news items we have to cover, Dave. Which are very, very well. Actually, there's three. Hurricane Nate has made landfall.
Oh,
it's a Category 1 storm now, but it has made landfall. Catalonia does want to declare independence. That's going to happen on Monday, and the Spanish Prime Minister has warned that he might suspend the region's autonomy. So this is one to watch, guys. What happens in Catalonia is going to be telling for the large European Union. So there's Brexit. And now you've got little other component parts of countries seeking their independence. It's the exact opposite to globalization. In fact, globalization is what has caused this, in my opinion. It's the fear of the global entities, that are going against regional and national interests. And then finally, Dave, and I do want to mention one thing about the shooting, but finally, there is an outbreak of plague in Madagascar.
Oh.
Yeah, a million doses of antibiotics have been shipped to Madagascar, and 33 people have been killed. Now, this is not the bubonic plague. This is the pneumonic plague, which is much, much worse, because the pneumonic plague is spread via the air. Okay, so let's be clear that this is also something that is a bit of worrisome. Okay, it's an island, sure enough, but it's another outbreak. I mean, we thought we were done with the plague, but then it reared its ugly head in China, in India, and now we have an outbreak, a severe outbreak in Madagascar. So if you're flying to Madagascar or the Seychelles or anywhere near there or Malagasy, right? I suggest you don't. Okay,
or like Mickey's suggested, Mickey, I liked your history of conversation because if you're getting a connecting flight with someone that's going there or been from there,
that's right.
That's still a risk. I think it's the connecting flights that are the most dangerous because you're unaware of their destination. And remember, in Madagascar, Mackie, where were all those plane parts that they kept saying was MH370 washing up?
Well, they're actually right there, in fact, in Madagascar. So that's interesting, right? But yeah. They've also said now that they have solved the mystery of that flight and saying it's just west of Australia in a 20,000 kilometer square radius. Okay, sure, that's what happened. I have no doubt. No doubt. That's
because the government's narrative is always correct, whatever it is. You have to remember that that's what they want you to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is serious stuff, guys. Be careful of that. Don't Madagascar or even connecting flights. It's tough, especially if people are sneezing and coughing. When I think I said this last time, but when I went to Singapore a couple of weeks ago, they were measuring every passenger's temperature as they walked through.
They actually do that in Sydney Airport. I know that they have heat like FLIR activated so that they can see the infrared signatures of your faces.
That's right, and of course it shows your temperature. There's one thing I do want to say about the shooting. It's because I listened to it immediately when it happened. I listened to all the newscasts because usually those newscasts that might capture the essence may never be repeated because something might be said that people don't like. So I listened to his brother being interviewed, and he goes,
I saw that too.
Right, I have no idea what happened. I don't understand. And the brother said something very interesting. Like two things. One, he doesn't have a military background. He's not a shooter. Two, if his brother could do this, he said, then we should all be really, really worried. Okay, because it's completely incongruent. The guy is rich. He's retired. He's 60 odd years old. He's got a girlfriend. And apparently, there are two stories that were told in the immediate aftermath. One, he had been buying up guns in the months leading up to it in 4 states. He did it over a few months, 3 or 4 months. And then a couple of days later, the story was he had been collecting guns for decades. There's a significant difference between collecting guns over decades and collecting guns over a few months. And not only that, nobody in his life had been aware of any of this, right? Now, I'm not saying you can't hide things like that. Of course you can. But now then other things came out as well, such as he wanted to survive the shooting, but then he killed himself anyway. He had 25 kilos of explosive in his car. He bought or he rented apartments in other music festival areas. And interestingly enough, he was shooting for about 10 minutes. That's how long he was shooting for, right? And then, for all intents and purposes, it seems like he killed himself. It was another hour before the police stormed his room. So he was shooting for 10 minutes, stopped shooting, and then it was another hour before the police actually kicked down the door in the Mandalay. So you have to ask yourself, if you wanted to cause maximum mayhem and destruction and whatever, why did he stop? Why did he have 20 odd guns in his room and thousands of rounds of ammunition and only shot for 10 minutes? Now, obviously, the carnage he caused was horrific. Almost 60 people dead, over 500 injured. But you have to ask yourself, you have to, all things considered, I guess we were a bit lucky that he only shot for 10 minutes. A lot of things don't add up for me. Obviously, the attack happened. Obviously, people were killed, but the shooter, is probably he makes as much sense as a shooter as Martin Bryant did in 1996 in Australia. If you look at the background of the people, right, and the I guess the will or the resolve and then the skill. So this gentleman makes as much sense as Martin Bryant did. And if you listen to our show on that, you will understand what I'm talking about. Now, sorry, Dave, that's all I have to say about that. Is there anything you wanted to add from a news perspective?
Only on the same story, real quickly, and that was that if I was trying to run some scenarios. Now, this is no different from what the police would think behind the scenes. They would examine the body, the coroner would declare the time of death, and if that was associated correctly with and placed him as a suicide. I saw an image, but I didn't see blood splats. I saw most of the blood coming from the mouth. In this day and age, there was a lot of discussion. Just a quick sidestep. A lot of discussion about from the media about what they should and shouldn't say about this kind of behavior in someone. Should you immediately, say what his name was and get all of the background and interview all the family, and should you that, or should you not do that? And they cited some examples, and one of those examples was that in the case of child abuse or suicide, for instance, in our country, in Australia, they limit the kinds of information and the speak they use when announcing the story to limit copycat. I know that that's always been something that the New South Wales police are very careful, well, in the past were very careful to describe something in such a way as to not allow a copycat from doing that same thing and putting all the blame onto the person who'd committed the first offence. My father was a policeman, and he gave me several examples of how that was, especially when they were going live to air. So my dad would say, well, they're holding back a bit of information here. I can't tell you what it is, but it's pertinent to the case that we don't describe that. So, and I think that's really interesting because, everyone says, oh, the news tells us everything. No, they don't. They do certainly hold back. Well, they used to. And now it's changing so much that this whole guy's life and his family and his brother and the girlfriend and all came out really quickly in this case and said, actually, the guy was really lovely. He was giving money to people and doing this and doing that. And yet, one thing that I still find difficult to contemplate with this, and if we're getting all this information, where's the internal hotel footage of him lugging all of this gear up to his hotel room? Where's all that footage? I don't see any of that.
Right. There's 20 odd fairly large guns and ammunition and so forth. You're right, Dave.
Hundreds and hundreds of pounds worth of equipment, and that's one thing that I think is interesting. The police would have been trying to create different scenarios because, yes, you have a dead guy in a room with blown out windows. Yeah. From a vantage point that could have been the shooter. Yes, there were rounds shot off in that room, but it doesn't mean that he's the guy. It just means that he was found dead in the room, which is, according to the facts so far, very limited facts, that he was, in fact, the perpetrator. However, like I said earlier, the muzzle flashes appear to come from a different floor in a completely different region of the same Mandalay hotel. Now, if the muzzle flashes don't appear from his room and they appear from someone else, was he just placed there? Was he supposed to be? Maybe he was murdered. Maybe he didn't fire one round at all. Maybe it was a second person. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was a team of people shooting down into the crowd. I'm just saying maybe, because I don't know. But if there was more than one shooter, or it's still possible that he wasn't alone in the room. There's no proof that says that he was or he wasn't. The footage from the hotel would prove a lot more. And if that's vacant or is remaining out of the public eye or out of the media at all, then maybe that's where we should be focusing our attention. What is missing? Not what's been... See, I think they dumped everything on us so we would just accept it. And I'm not going to talk about that month, the month where there was something that happened with some buildings in the Pentagon and that stuff, right? And in Pennsylvania.
I don't know what you're talking about, Dave.
Yeah, neither do I.
It's a complete mystery to me. I don't know.
It is.
What?
So when there's only 5 frames from one security camera at the guard's gate at the Pentagon, for instance, why was all the other film and all the other cameras confiscated? Well, then that doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to Mackie. And why aren't we seeing this other stuff coming from the hotel? They'd be riddled with security cameras. Yeah? And I know the cell phone information. You can triangulate someone down to the millisecond, right? To the millimeter, or within a couple of meters at least. So that could place someone on the floor. Why isn't there any of that? Is this like a spy thing, like you see on the Bourne Identity, for instance, where he just happened to stumble in? Maybe they were using his room. Maybe he wasn't even a part of it at all. I'm only putting this out there because the character witnesses don't seem to have the same view of the perpetrator that they're portraying in the media. And they're the ones closest to him. Yeah, everyone can have a dark side. Everyone can do things like that. And I think trying to hide that much stuff from people, it's just a bit weird. Do you remember, Mackie, there was a story where there was a dead body, I think, was it in the trunk of a car, and the car was full of weapons, and the guy had, a storage locker full of weapons, and no one could identify who the guy was?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? It looked like a spy had been killed somehow, right? Weaponized to the hilt. And the car was found downtown in LA or something like that, from what I remember. We didn't hear the end of that. That story came and went. That was like those little single column story. All you hear is a bit of it, is a sniff of the story, and then it vanishes. Why did it vanish? Why wasn't there any much more on it? And that's the thing that I'm thinking about with this one. And that's my 8 minutes taken up with this discussion. But don't just believe the narrative, all of you. Just think about it. And I don't think this is an open and shut case. I think they found the guy. They found a person they could blame it on. The video doesn't seem to match up. That leaves questions. But if the police are happy to sew it up and go, oh, I'm done with that, then we have a killer at large. And I think that's the bigger worry to me. Mackie, over to you.
No, but look, and that's always the problem, though. I mean, I'm not debating the reality of these massacres or these shootings or people driving trucks into people. What I do want to debate is whether or not the right people have been fingered for the crime. And Dave is right. If the wrong people have been identified or set up as patsies, then the true murderers are still out in the world, and that's what they are, murderers. And we just had some interesting information in the chat room, but we can't say any of this, Zippy, 777, until you can substantiate and tell us who might have told us those, or who told you those rumors. Then I'm very happy to bring this to the air if it can be substantiated. But it smells a little fishy. And apparently there was a woman, and that's been in the media as well, that had warned people.
Right. Yes.
Right. So yes. that's part of that's in the public domain. There's a woman that said, "Oh no, don't go in, you will all die." Okay, that's I don't know if that's in every concert that there's like a nutter that does that. Not in all the concerts I've right? Go on.
It was like 20 minutes before or something that had occurred that this witness had said on air, being interviewed, that she was warned by a lady. She said that the man and woman who were Hispanic, but she was the one saying that you're all going to die, get out of here. Yeah,
and interesting, right? Again, I mean, but having said that, the interesting thing is we have similar reports around that for 912, for the Titanic itself as well. People simply didn't board the ship or were warned or had some psychic predictions about it. So again, it's all around the fabric of reality that we inhabit. I mean, how much of it is transparent and easily penetrated. Be it to glimpse the past or glimpse the future or possible future, or then you start talking about quantum mechanics and it becomes all very confused and hazy. Go on.
Mackie, I just posted the 2 words that I think that is going to come from this, and I don't know. And you can see what I've typed into the chat room.
I don't think it's going to happen.
No, I don't think so. And I think that this is yet again another example of the Second Amendment and how powerful this is in the US. Because right now they're talking about, how Australia did this thing after Australia did gun control, and they just wound it up again. So we had a gun buyback scheme, in Australia. But it doesn't stop. It only stops lethal gun use. So that's all it does. But weapon, the total murders don't go down. Only the murders with guns go down if you take the guns away. They end up being motor vehicles, or they end up being, sharp objects or blunt objects, even worse.
Yeah, let's be clear though. We have to make a couple of points around this though. You have to understand the relative number of things that we're talking about here, and what actually happened in this particular. So this particular shooting has as its central tenet automatic weapons. Should you have an automatic weapon? Well, the answer is I don't. For hunting, I hunt or have hunted, I should say. I like shooting. I'm not a shooter. I don't own any guns, but I have been shooting, and when I was very young, I did it quite a bit. But my point is, you don't need fully automatic weapons to go hunting. So that's really the debate. And in America already, having fully automated weapons, assault weapons, is illegal. So that's fine. What is not illegal is the kit that converts a semi-automatic weapon to a fully automatic weapon. And that's what this gentleman apparently did. He purchased the kit legally online and converted his guns fairly simply, in fact, to fully automatic weapons. But please, everybody out there, understand one thing. Dave is 100% correct. The murder rate has not dropped in Australia as a result of the gun amnesty or the gun confiscations. And in fact, the gangs, the criminals, still have guns, and there are shootings in Sydney. So that still happens. And another thing is, people will find another way to harm you, be it in a truck, or like Dave said, with knives or blunt objects, or arson has become very popular in Australia as well as a method of this kind of attack. But you also have to look at the total numbers. Think about that. So there are 325 million people in America. 325 million. People always say, so many gun crimes in America. Yeah, well, that's because there are 325 million people. If you compare it, you can't compare the US to Germany or to France or to Great Britain or Ireland. You have to compare the United States of America to Europe. So you look at the United States of America and its statistics, and then you look at the European statistics, and all of a sudden you realize, they're not that far apart. But also remember, there are 325 million people, and one guy allegedly took it upon himself to kill a large number of people with automatic assault rifles. I take those odds. I'll be honest with you. I will take those odds. I'm not tempting fate here, but out of 325 million people, there was just the one guy. Okay, these shootings are happening once, twice, 3 times a year, and they're horrific, and I wish they didn't. But you have to put this in perspective. You have to put it in perspective of the total population of the United States, and you have to put it in perspective in understanding how many guns are actually out there. A lot of guns. If the doomsayers were right and what they said was true, there should be shootings like this every day. And there should be thousands, if not tens of thousands of people killed every year in gun violence, right? But these are extraordinary events, okay, which are horrific, and I wish they didn't happen. But I tell you what, if this gentleman is truly guilty of this crime, and he truly spent decades collecting these guns, and so for decades now he has been hatching this plan of killing this many people, he would have found a way to do it otherwise if he hadn't had the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He would have found something if it is true. If he's truly been he'd done this. He's been living this double life allegedly for decades. And most serial killers do that as well. Most serial killers live double or even triple lives, where everybody thought he was so quiet. He was such a nice and quiet guy, right? Jeffrey Dahmer, yeah, he kept to himself. Maybe he was a bit odd, but nobody would suspect him of the things that he did. Horrific things. So sorry. I just want to make sure that everybody understands the context of this. There is a context here, guys, right? And it's important that we don't lose sight of it in this debate over whether or not you should have guns or not. I don't see why not. If people are taught gun usage from an early age and the respect for the weapon, it's a weapon that can kill. In the same way that you train somebody to drive, you train people to drive a car so you don't have accidents. Why don't you train people to use guns in the same way? Yeah, and have a test and whatever. Anyway, that's just my opinion.
That's a good point, Mackie. I think you wrapped that one up pretty well. So look, we'll just have to wait and see what happens, to see how much the gun control is pushed on the populations. Yeah. I sent Mackie, and I'm going to put this into the chat room as well, a link to the homicide rates in Australia, and there was a decline in homicides overall, but the decline isn't associated with the loss of firearms. And I think that's really important to remember. So firearms, accidental or manslaughter, yeah, that can be defined in many ways. It's against murder. So murders went down, homicides pretty much stayed flat. So people claiming accidental death, or you were defending yourself or something like that. Whereas murder went down, but murder went down for any number of reasons, and it wasn't directly associated with the loss of guns, because the knife rate using sharp implements went up. Just think about it, the way it would happen. If England hasn't been, they haven't allowed weapons for a long time, and all the bad peoples have weapons. Mm-hmm. Just think about how that would all tie in together. And America isn't. I don't think America is the place with the highest amount of gun ownership. It's high, but I don't think it's the highest per person. And other countries can do it just as well, but maybe it's something else. And I put that out there. Maybe there's another reason for it. The tall poppy syndrome, Mackie, always comes to mind. Tall poppy is that's the one that gets cut, and you bring it down. So I hesitate to suggest, any other motives. But, I think time will tell. All of these things will come to fruition, or they won't. Or they'll just, tighten it up. You won't hear any more. Everything we post, don't forget, is being analyzed. And as, 1 minute, they'll be bursting into the door of your place and arresting you for just having a sentiment through sentiment analysis. At some point, I just wanted to tie it back to that, because there's this George Orwellian, state where the elites have their own rules. If you don't believe that, how many celebrities have ever been drink driving who have gone to jail? None. I can't say none. Not as many as people who aren't famous or don't have money. Just think about that. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there are rules for them. There is rules for us. And if you have a look at any of the new music videos that are coming out, there's certainly some people who are crispy, clean people who are coming out with very dark videos. Maybe this is, I mean, they don't, the singer isn't the person, for instance, who's deciding the content of their music video. That comes from above. And a lot of people coming out saying that whole industry, including Hollywood, has some issues that they need to sort out. I don't want to go any deeper. You know what I'm talking about. But Mekki, look, we're almost a whole hour worth of talking about this. Is there anything else we need to bring up?
No, we've got it all. So you're right. We've got another, I don't know, 8-9 minutes left. I quickly want to set the scene, or the background for today's topic. So
awesome.
We are going to talk about we're going to talk about language, and when I say, and we're going to look at what language is, the definition thereof, and so forth. But then we also ask ourselves, well, what's the origin of language? What do we think, scientifically speaking? But then we also look at mythology, and you know what? Yet again, when we looked at this mythology, it was a very strange learning for me. I had some ideas, and they form part of the hypothesis, but what we uncovered was quite staggering. And yes, there could be some cross-cultural contamination, sure enough, but I do believe that once again the differences in the mythologies make them more authentic than the similarities, and they speak for independent origin stories here of language, rather than something that has been taken from another culture. So bear with us. It's very interesting. We will definitely span a couple of weekends with this. But ultimately, and I don't want to take away our conclusion here too much, but ultimately you have to ask yourself, well, what was the original language that everybody talks about, right? What was that perfect medium of communication that was supposed to have existed in ancient times? And we will share that thought with you. But it is fascinating, guys, because I mean, we all talk now. We talk in words, and we don't think anything about it. But everything we do is just an approximation of meaning, right? So when we use language, Dave, as we do every day, we don't convey the actual thing. We convey a concept, an idea, or an approximation of a thing. When I say chair, and we said this before, right? When I say chair, it means a very specific thing to all of us, but it also means a whole range of things to us. Because when I say chair, there's a certain concept that pops into your mind. A chair. I know what a chair is. It's something I sit on, and made from wood or plastic or whatever. It's got 4 legs, 3 legs, 2 legs. But these are all differences, right? In perception. So when I say chair to 10 people, they might think of 10 different things. So it is just an approximation of something. I have to be very, very descriptive to convey the actual meaning. I have to say, well, I'm talking about an oak chair, which is 73 centimeters high. It's got a wicker-based seating arrangement. It's got 4 legs. It is mahogany in color. It has armrests, which are 20 centimeters long. Blah blah blah. You understand what I'm saying? So in order for me to really describe the thing, the proper thing in itself, I have to say a lot, right? But
Mekki, I don't want to derail you here, but when you said chair, the first thing I thought was a wooden chair, like a shaker chair, if everyone would know what that is.
Yep.
However, my second thought was, maybe you didn't mean a seat. Maybe you meant the chair of a committee. And so then I pictured a different thing. I pictured a person there maybe with a gavel, the chair who's going to orchestrate a committee. And I thought, wow, how extraordinary. You just took me between 2 different places. Now I don't know where to land.
See, and that's really the point here, because language, even if you speak the same language as the next person, even if you do that, you can be confused, and you can be you can miscommunicate. Think about that. That's really the kicker here, right? So it is that feature of language, if you will, the miscommunication, even if you speak the same language. Imagine how hard it is if you don't speak the same language. My goodness. You've got no chance. Okay, you've got no chance.
International sign language?
Yeah. Actually, yeah, well, I mean, sure. If you've got a common language like Esperanto, yes, that's what we're talking about. What was the common language, right? So, we just had some very good comments from the chat room here, from our friends, and they already going to the conclusion of our little show cycle here. So Blasphemous Buddha and Zippy777, you're exactly on the right track. Go on.
Another voice that isn't listed in the chat room mentioned MK Ultra as another alternate for the topic we've just passed.
Oh, look, and that's true. Oh, don't go away, guys. It will be very interesting. You might even learn something.
Pepsi.
Partial credit.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to Shiny Side Out with David Mackey on the #1 listener-supported radio on the internet. In fact, anywhere in the universe, as long as you can get the Earth's internet. Thank you. Bit of a disclaimer. You know what? In the break, I would have expected that if you don't already have an automatic monthly donation to the station to access the archives of $5 a month, that's it, that you would have chosen that time, the optimum time to make a donation, to be able to receive a gift in return. If it's a one-off, that's fine. Everything helps. However, you can get something in return. Not just the ability to access the station's archives, but you can get something like, a seed pack with 75,000 seeds, or you can get an EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents that Nighthawk, the station owner, can't mention on air, which is really critical. Think about how they may help you in times of need. There are other things you need to do, but follow the instructions carefully when making a donation. If you're in the USA, you can call in during our show on 347-688-2902, or if you have Skype, you only need to add a contact called or named Freedom Screen. It's 2 words joined together, Freedom Screen. Anyway, if you live in Kentucky, you can listen on FM, WZZR 101.3, or, of course, anywhere else in the world. Use your preferred search engine to look for Revolution Radio Studio A, and you'll come up with a whole bunch of things. 2 things that won't come up immediately, I don't believe, when I did the last search, and that is that Freedom Slips have their own mobile app available on the website of freedomslips.com, or the Shiny Side Out app. You need to go to your app store to look for that. Shiny Side Out, 3 words. Do that, you'll get our app. It's pretty cool. You can listen to the station from the app anywhere you are, but it will use your data allowance, so make sure you're in a good plan or on Wi-Fi, and that'll get away from those problems. This is show number 291. Gap for Mechie.
190 and 200. 100.
Oh, I like the echo. You're in must be a huge room there. Now, it's at least 100 meters across.
At least.
Because that was about a third of a second between each one, or up to about a second. 330 meters divided by 2, 150 thereabouts meters across in that room. Now, Now, what was I saying? That's right. So you're going to get the archives. I do it. $5 a month. Is that a coffee? It's very important you do that. Really is. You want to support the station. And the other one is Meki and I from Shiny Side Out would like to ensure the quick and speedy, healthily recovery of an ailment that the station owner has, Nighthawk. Let's
Absolutely.
Fingers crossed. And I know fingers crossed. That's too hopeful. He's going to get better. Just let's make it quick.
Yes.
All right. Awesome.
Absolutely.
And if you're a fan like me, the Bathurst 1000 is nearly finished, lap 153, and there's been a couple of incidences. Let's hope that hurries. Only less than 10 laps to go. Not that I'm watching. There's a blog on my screen. It's self-updating, and I get to see what's going on. Now, on to the topic of language. Meki, what's the definition of language itself?
I'll tell you. So let's look at this and understand what it is we're talking about. Firstly, I'm going to share 4 definitions with you. And firstly, the words, the pronunciation, and the methods of combining them used and understood by a community. Secondly, it's audible, articulate, meaningful sound as produced by the action of the vocal organs. Thirdly, a systematic means of communicating ideas or feelings by the use of conventionalized signs, sounds, gestures, or marks having understood meanings. And then finally, the suggestion by objects, actions, or conditions of associated ideas or feelings. Now, again, in all of these definitions, you might have this common thread, which actually talks about, in a way, approximation. You're never actually communicating your true intent, or nobody can ever know what you truly think, right? Think about that for a second. Now, language, and I think this is a long one. We will take this in turns, but language is the ability to acquire and use complex systems of communication, particularly the human ability to do so. And a language is any specific example of such a system. The scientific study of language is called linguistics. Questions concerning the philosophy of language, such as whether words can represent experience, which is really a mind-bender if you think about it, have been debated since Gorgias and Plato in ancient Greece. Thinkers such as Rousseau have argued that language originated from emotions, while others like Kant have held that it originated from rational and logical thought. 20th century philosophers such as Wittgenstein argued that philosophy is really the study of language. Major figures in linguistics include Ferdinand de Saussure and Noam Chomsky. Estimates of the number of languages in the world vary between 5 and 7,000. However, any precise estimate depends on a partly arbitrary distinction between languages and dialects. Natural languages are spoken or signed, but any language can be encoded into secondary media using auditory, visual, or tactile stimuli, for example, in whistling, signed, or braille, Dave.
Yeah, I'd just like to suggest the spelling of the word that seemed a little inappropriate, but it isn't. Meki's accent plus this word made it sound a little like he shouldn't have been able to say that on air, but it is Kant is K-A-N-T. I repeat,
Immanuel Kant. That's
A-N-T. That's right. Unfortunate naming of someone there. I wonder what their profession was. Now, this is because human language is modality independent, depending on philosophical perspectives regarding the definition of language and meaning. When used as a general concept, language may refer to the cognitive ability to learn and use systems of complex communication, or to describe the set of rules that makes up these systems, or the set of utterances that can be produced from those rules. All languages rely on the process of semosis to relate signs of particular meanings. Oral, manual, and tactile languages contain phonological systems that governs how symbols are used to form sequences known as words or morphemes, and a syntactic system that governs how words and morphemes are combined to form phrases and utterances. Human language has the properties of productivity and displacement and relies entirely on social convention and learning. Its complex structure offers a much wider range of expressions than known systems of animal communication. Language is thought to have originated when early hominins started gradually changing their primate communication systems, acquiring the ability to form a theory of other minds and a shared intentionality. Meki, I love how this is coming off the back of our previous show cycle.
I know it actually goes hand in hand, and you will see as we go further into this how this even more underscores what we just discussed around human timelines. Now, this, in fact, what Dave just said, there was something very, very important he said. What he said there was that the human language relies entirely on social convention and learning. That's correct. If you don't grow up in a certain social setting and culture, and you don't learn the language at that point, it'll be much harder for you to learn that later. In fact, some of the subtleties of that culture will forever be close to you because you never had that exposure, if you will, to those things that are communicated, not just via language, but through the social learning of touch and interaction with your peers and family group. Anyway, this development is sometimes thought to have coincided with an increase in brain volume. And many linguists see the structures of language as having evolved to serve specific communicative and social functions. Language is processed in many different locations in the human brain, but especially in Broca's and Wernicke's areas. Humans acquire language through social interaction in early childhood, and children generally speak fluently when they are approximately 3 years old. And I tell you what, watching my children learn to speak, in fact, in several languages in my household, not just one language, is really something amazing to behold. And you can see how their thoughts become more complex and they can express themselves in more complex ways as they get older. The use of language is deeply entrenched in human culture. Therefore, in addition to its strictly communicative uses, language also has many social and cultural uses, such as signifying group identity, social stratification, as well as social grooming and entertainment. Now, these are very important points, Dave, right? Because what language does, it, as much as it unites, it also divides. Language is a divisive tool. And even if you speak English, all of you, right? The way you speak it will color your social stratum, right? So essentially, if let's say you're working class English, you might speak with a Cockney accent, for argument's sake, right? If you're really highly educated and went to any number of public schools in England, you might speak with a fairly snooty accent. But the way you speak and how you choose to communicate identifies you for the most part, right? Causing division, social division at the very least. Dave?
Completely. And I've got so many examples of that, it's not funny. I have to say the first one was in Australia, because the cities weren't connected to each other. They'd all it's something for a bit later on, but they co-developed the same language, the same accent. Isn't that extraordinary? Because of the types of people that were here in Australia, their language, and that's the Irish, there was the Chinese, there was everyone for gold rushes. And at the end of all of that, we ended up with towns with the same accent. However, they were said to, according to the language development, have developed independently of each other. And that's something else. There's very little cross-contamination between the state's major cities. And anyway, as a result, then, because of this accent, England decided, because they were still sort of ruling with a hands-on perspective, they decided to introduce the, well-pronounced words. And they wanted to try and educate people, thinking that this was, we were doing very poorly in our own education of language. It wasn't the Queen's English. So that led to something around about the 30s and 40s, I think it was, in the late 40s, where people were trying to establish a brand new style of speaking, a very posh sounding style of speaking. But that fell by the wayside because we didn't identify with it. A lot of people tried, and then that became something more of the elite level, and everyone else was still talking in different, maybe you could call it ochre, the true Australian
ochre. That's a very interesting term, ochre, right? And I want to see where that came from. Very interesting term.
So, but I'll get back to the text now. I just wanted to let you know that that it's, even I know in the US, I know in England, there's 20 accents in England alone, and how they could do that when they're all connected to each other is sort of beyond me. I understand it, I get it, but it's if we could establish the same accent, how extraordinary is that? And that's just an accent. And Meki's right with words and watching your children grow up. And what I really like about English, just for a minute, was that when you hear a child using the rules of the language to create a word, but because English is so complicated, that word isn't the right one. They'll put an ed at the end of something. Hang on, no, you actually have to change the vowel sound to make that work. Like dove, right, rather than dived. Yeah. Yes. Maybe that's the way you have to do it, and it's an extraordinary thing. So I'll keep going. There's a picture of the Tower of Babel, or an artist impression of the Tower of Babel. And it says, oil on board, 1563, I don't know where 19 came from. Humans have speculated about the origins of language throughout history. The biblical myth of the Tower of Babel is one such account. Other cultures have different stories of how language arose. Theories about the origin of language differ in regard to their basic assumptions about what language is. Some theories are based on the idea that language is so complex that one cannot imagine it simply appearing from nothing in its final form, but that it must have evolved from earlier pre-linguistic systems among our pre-human ancestors. These theories can be called continuity-based theories. You have to remember that term. The opposite viewpoint is that language is such a unique human trait that it cannot be compared to anything found among non-humans, and that it must therefore have appeared suddenly in the transition of pre-hominids to early man. These theories can be defined as discontinuity-based. Similarly, theories based on Chomsky's generative view of language see language mostly as an innate faculty that is largely genetically encoded, whereas functionalist theories see it as a system that is largely cultural, learned through social interaction. Meki.
Yeah, okay. It's nature versus nature, right? Which one is it? Is it part of our genes, or do we have to learn it, or is it both? I think it's both. One prominent proponent of a discontinuity-based theory of human language origins is linguist and philosopher Noam Chomsky. I like Chomsky. Chomsky proposes that some random mutation took place, maybe after some strange cosmic ray shower, and it reorganized the brain, implanting a language organ in an otherwise primate brain. Though cautioning against taking this story too, literally. Chomsky insists that it may be closer to reality than many other fairy tales that are told about evolutionary processes, including language. Let me say this here. He said this. It may be closer to reality than many other fairy tales that are told about evolutionary processes. I love that quote, including language. Continuity-based theories are held by a majority of scholars, but they vary in how they envision this development, because it goes hand in hand, of course, with the theory of evolution. Those who see language as being mostly innate, for example, psychologist Steven Pinker, hold the precedence to be animal cognition, whereas those who see language as a socially learned tool of communication, such as psychologist Michael Tomasello, see it as having developed from animal communication in primates. Either gestural or vocal communication to assist in cooperation. And we know that other animals communicate with each other as well. Other continuity-based models see language as having developed from music, a view already espoused by Rousseau, Herder, Humboldt, and even Charles Darwin. A prominent proponent of this view is archaeologist Stephen Mithen. Stephen Anderson states that the age of spoken language is estimated at 60,000 to 100,000 years, and that researchers on the evolutionary origin of language generally find it plausible to suggest that language was invented only once, and that all modern spoken languages are thus in some way related, even if that relation can no longer be recovered, because of limitations on the methods available for reconstruction. Dave?
A number of good points to make out of that. And one is that, yes, other animals communicate with audible sounds, some sub-audible. So like elephants, we can't hear some of the sounds that they make because we can feel it, we can't hear it. Birds, for instance, there's a range of birds in Australia, for instance, which if you were to approach their nests, and they live in a community, and they'll have a lookout, and that lookout will warn the other birds who happen to maybe not be looking in your direction or in my direction, for instance, as I approach the tree, they'll change their call as a warning call to say there's an intruder, or whatever it is that they're telling their friends. Watch out, I have something here. There is something, I can see someone or something, whatever it is that they're saying. And once I've left, I hear that warning change to it's what clearly would be they've moved away or the danger is now no longer present, and they return back to not making that sound at all. Well, I think it's very important that birds, though we can't understand what they actually say, can do that. And they do it. And they do it successfully. We know that dolphins and whales and submariner creatures all communicate with whistles and bleeps and blurts, and they can do that successfully. Even they have names of, like, for instance, dolphins have names for other dolphins, and they talk about the other dolphin even when they're not present. Meki, that's a very interesting point. The dolphins talk about other dolphins by name in a way that's you're having a conversation about. What I say, Meki and I were having a conversation about a friend of ours who's not here.
Yeah. Hey, did you see Bob swim and eat that fish? I mean, why would you eat a fish like that? You just don't eat fish like that, do you? Oh, I don't know this Bob guy. What?
But Meki, Bob was eating a coelacanth. Weren't they extinct?
Yes, 65 million years ago.
So I think that our arrogance as to believe that, even though it's been raised here, that only up until recently we just believed that none of them did any of the sort. They just made bleeps and chirps and whoever cares, right? That's not a language. We have a language. Well, to them, our language is inaudible. They can't hear it. Their ear isn't capable of hearing those things. The dolphins would, but definitely they hear the whistle that the person blows. Anyway, to move on. Researchers on the evolutionary origin of language generally find it plausible to suggest that language was invented only once. So you said this, didn't you, making this one? And that all modern language, yeah, you did. So the method of reconstruction was the other point I had to make. Now, Maggie and I had spoken about with you about some languages which are isolates, and we're going to get to those. But just think about those for a minute. Languages that don't appear to have any connection with any other language, or were a dead-end language, or they don't connect to us today. Yes, they have a language of their own, but there doesn't seem to be anything in between. Just think of that. That's one of the other point that Mackie raised there. Because language emerged in the early prehistory of man, before the existence of any written records, its early development has left no historical traces, and that it's believed that no comparable processes can be observed today. And now, I don't believe that to be true. I think we can see it wherever we look. Theories that stress continuity often look at animals to see if, for example, primates display any traits that can be seen as, what's that word again, Mackie?
Analogous.
Analogous, thank you very much, to what pre-human language must have been like. And early human fossils can be inspected for traces of physical adaptation to language, use, or pre-linguistic forms of symbolic behavior. Among the signs of in human fossils that may suggest linguistic abilities are the size of the brain relative to the body mass, the presence of a larynx capable of advanced sound production, and the nature of tools and other manufactured artifacts. It was mostly undisputed that pre-human Australopithecines did not have communication systems significantly different from those found in great apes in general. A 2017 study on Ardipithecus ramidus, however, might change this, but scholarly opinion vary to the developments since the appearance of the genus Homo some 2.5 million years ago. Mackie?
Some scholars assume the development of primitive language-like systems, proto-language, as early as Homo habilis 2.3 million years ago, while others place the development of primitive symbolic communication only with Homo erectus 1.8 million years ago, or Homo heidelbergensis 0.6 or 600,000 years ago, and the development of language proper with anatomically modern Homo sapiens with the Upper Paleolithic Revolution less than 100,000 years ago. Now, I have to say here that we have absolutely no evidence for any of this. So this is one of those things that actually makes absolutely no sense to even discuss, because we have no evidence. I mean, okay, the descended larynx, and we're going to go into this in the next article, in fact. In fact, there are, and this is something that was interesting mentioned here by, sorry, I don't want to get the name wrong, Rev Radio. So Rev Radio has just posted a link into the chat that features the Khoisan click language. Then you've also got click sounds in the Kalahari Bushman language, like Zippy777 points out. And there's also, and thank you very much, WD in Irish and Rev Radio again, the whistled language of the island of La Gomera. I mentioned that earlier, and they already found the video. So there are different approaches that don't require a descended larynx. So let's just be clear on that for a second here, right? So it's just, again, our very narrow and in my opinion, I think a wrong view that language has to be just so, right? I mean, as Dave has explained just earlier, just before he took on that piece of text, dolphins and whales, for example, they do communicate, they speak to each other. They speak about other members of their species while they're not there, right? Which is a high degree of abstract thought, if you think about it, right? This is not a problem that's immediately in front of you. You now have thoughts about something that you can no longer, in fact, perceive, but you have a memory of it, and you're somehow communicating that memory to someone else. That's pretty amazing stuff if you really think about it. So language, or the use of language, while we like to give it some kind of anatomical spin may not necessarily be so, to be clear. I like to think of communication as something that is externally realized, be it through speech, sound waves, traveling through the air in the atmosphere, right? You can't speak, obviously, in space, because there's no medium through which sound waves would travel. Or sign language, which you could use anywhere. Braille is a form of communication, tactile, right? And there are other forms of communication like that. So language to me is everything, not just the spoken language, but everything. And it still doesn't answer the question to the original language. What was the original language? We'll get to that, though, in a second. This article here is very interesting because it does talk about the anatomical features of human speech. So the origins of human language, one of the hardest problems in science. How human language began has been a question pestering researchers for centuries. One of the biggest issues with this topic is that empirical evidence is still lacking despite our greatest advances in technology. It's just reiterating my point, which how would we? We don't have any sound recordings from 100,000 years ago. Okay, we don't. Or do we? This lack of concrete evidence even once led to the prohibition of any future debates regarding the origins of communication by the Linguistic Society of Paris. Think about that. Despite the obstacle, yeah, I know, right? Despite the obstacles, a number of researchers, including psychologists, anthropologists, archaeologists, and linguists, continue on studying the topic. The results of the numerous studies on early communication can be divided into two major categories of communication: vocalizations and gestures. And this article is actually focusing on vocalization. Dave?
Our hyoid bones and complex brains, part of what helps us do more than chatter like chimps. As spoken language is by nature impermanent, then the best empirical evidence for this field is thought. A field of thought is the hyoid bone. This bone, as it appears and functions in modern Homo sapiens, is only believed to be found in our predecessors, Homo heidelbergensis, as of about 300,000 years ago, and in our prehistoric cousins, the Neanderthals. Nevertheless, the appearance of the Kerbera 2 hyoid in both species does not definitively prove that we were set to use speech or complex language, that they were. That being said, the hyoid bone is believed by many researchers to be the foundation of speech for humans, and without our specifically shape that hyoid bones in exactly the right place, functioning alongside a precisely descended larynx, it is believed that we would sound much like chimps. If it wasn't for the bones, we'd sound like chimps. We have an image here in the show notes if you're interested, go to the website. Thus, we had a nicely complex and precise throat anatomy, but alongside this part of the anatomy, we also have to have a sufficiently complex brain to have something to talk about. Researchers believe that our ancient ancestors had what Noam Chomsky calls the LAD, language acquisition device, the ability to learn language and to use it in a creative way. This creativity can be evinced by the art created some 300,000 to 700,000 years ago by our Paleolithic predecessors.
Yes, correct. Now, so as you can see, once again, our anatomy is perfectly aligned to our speech. There's a shock. Now, I don't want to be flippant here, but my point is, if we didn't have a throat that looked exactly like that, with the descended larynx and the hyoid bone and the tongue and mouth that can shape, sounds the way we do, we'd still be able to communicate. So we should not assume that simply because a species or someone doesn't have that specific thing, they can't talk to each other. So I think we just have to once again step back, of that anthropomorphical train, step off it, and understand that the world, the universe, is actually bigger than that. Now we are speaking like that, and if you wanted to make human-like sounds like that, then you would have to have something like this. Now, having said that, a parrot or a macaw doesn't have a system of bones and larynx and such as we do. Not exactly the same. They don't really have a hyoid bone either. Yet they can produce human speech. As if you have one of those birds, you probably enjoy talking to them, and they mimic our sounds without a descended larynx. So let's be clear what we're talking about here, right? So this is once again very much focused on what humans can do. Now we get to the meaty bit of the show, the bit that I enjoy most, which is where now we're going into speculative country. We're going into complete speculation here, and we're going to look at a few things such as the mythological explanation for our language and why we have so many languages. I mean, you could argue, why don't we just have the one language? I mean, our brains are all very similar, right? So why don't we all have, even if we all separated, by great distances, why didn't we all develop the same language? I mean, some sounds are the same. So mama or baba, papa, or things like that, they're pretty much universal, right? For our parents, father and mother, ma, pa, believe it or not, that those sounds are almost universally used to describe a mother and father. Maybe the primary sounds formed by our mouth. I don't know, but so you could argue, then all our language should be the same, right? Surely, of course it isn't, because there are probably other factors, which we're not fully aware of. But what does mythology have to say about this? And we have to start, of course, with the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is an origin myth meant to explain why the world's peoples speak different languages. And bear with us here as we go through these different mythologies, because they're, if nothing, astounding. If nothing else, they're astounding. According to the story, a united humanity in the generations following the Great Flood, speaking a single language and migrating eastward, comes to the land of Shinar. There, they agree to build a city and a tower tall enough to reach heaven. Now remember those themes, please. It's very, very interesting. As Zippy777, yes, I will mention mathematics and language. Not today, we don't have time, I don't think, but thank you for bringing it up. Yes, that will be brought in. Okay, so themes, okay? There they agreed to build a city and tower tall enough to reach heaven. God, observing their city and tower, confounds their speech so that they can no longer understand each other and scatters them around the world. Now, of course, the aim here was to stop them building the tower so they couldn't reach heaven. That's why he did that, this God character. Some modern scholars have associated the Tower of Babel with known structures, notably the Etemenanke, ziggurat dedicated to the Mesopotamian god Marduk by Nabopolassar, the king of Babylonia, about 610 before the Common Era, so about 2,500 years ago. The Great Ziggurat of Babylon was 91 meters, it's about 300 feet tall. Alexander the Great ordered to be demolished about 2,300 years ago in preparation for a reconstruction that his death forestalled. A Sumerian story with some similar elements is told in Enumerka and the Lord of Aratta, which we will mention to you later. And Zippy777, sorry, before I hand to Dave. Yes, mathematics, some believe, is in fact the underlying language of the universe. And if that is true, it would just add another proof point to the theory, or hypothesis, in fact, rather than a theory, that we are living in a simulation. Dave, tell us about the biblical narrative. And guys, I want you to remember the themes here, as Dave tells them.
Thanks, Becky. biblical narrative, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Each one of these are quotes. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they did dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly, and they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar.
I'm sorry, you sound like Monty Python.
I know, right? And the number of the counting shall be 3, no more, no less. 4 they shall not count. So I can't help it. You know, I did grow up going to church, and this is the way that everyone spoke at the time. It seems like a commanding way to speak, and I think the text also justifies that. I can't help it. and they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. See, I do sound like it.
You do.
And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Genesis 11, 1 through 9.
Now, there's some very interesting points here, and they will be repeated in all the other mythologies of the language origins. Okay, one language, one purpose, and clearly that one language and one purpose was a threat to someone. So they set about to destroy that one language and scatter the people across the face of the earth so that they might, form different languages. Now, just very quickly, the etymology or the origin of the actual phrase, the Tower of Babel, it does not in fact appear in the Bible. It is always the city and the tower, or just the city. The original derivation of the name Babel, also the Hebrew name for Babylon, is uncertain, but it may come from Bab Ilum, meaning gate of God. According to the Bible, the city received the name Babel from the Hebrew word Balal, meaning to jumble or to confuse. Okay, so, and I've got here the Hebrew actual writing in brackets. So the Tower of Babel itself is actually not a term used in the Bible. Now, we have time, I think, for a number of these, Dave. So I'll take the first one, then you take the next one, and so on and so forth. These are various language origin myths from around the world. Various language origin. Now, the Hebrew Bible, we're starting with, and we have already spoken about that, but let me just, for completeness sake, talk about it again. Attributes the origin of language per se to humans, with Adam being asked to name the creatures that God had created. One of the most well-known examples in the West is the Tower of Babel passage from Genesis. It tells of God punishing humanity for arrogance and disobedience by the means of confusion of tongues. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, as Dave has earlier said. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do, which means now human beings are able to do anything they put their mind to. That's what it says. Let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. And same passage, of course, as Dave has just mentioned. Again, we could have done anything at this point, and God came down, or the Lord, I should say, came down and said, no, this far and no further. Uppity humans, no more. Dave?
What did we do? What did we do to offend them? I swear.
Right?
Yeah, I know. And thinking about the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Confusion,
Yes.
the city of confusion, the time of confusion.
Yes.
In the Americas, in common with the mythology of many other civilizations and cultures, which tell of a great flood. Once again, listen to our Great Flood show arc. Certain Native American tribes tell of a deluge which came over the earth. After the water subsides, various explanations are given for the new diversity in speech. Think about this. The diversity came from nowhere. It came from these little pockets of people left over. That's it. Or, as we found out in all the cases, that the people who were there now weren't the people that were there before. They were descendants in some way, but they didn't exist on either side of the flood. They were on one side only, or the other only. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec story maintains that only a man, Coxcox, and a woman, Quetzalcoatl, survive having floated on a piece of bark. They found themselves on land and begot many children who were first born unable to speak, but subsequently, upon the arrival of the dove, a dove, were endowed with language. Although each one was given a different speech such that they could not understand one another. That is an amazing story. That it matches the Babel story.
That's right. Now, the interesting thing is, once again, we're talking about a catastrophe, a flood, some kind of catastrophic event that scatters people and at the same time confuses language as well. So some kind of cataclysmic event, okay, that happened, and in seemingly in response to something humans did, the language was confused. In North America, a similar flood is described by the Casca people from North America. However, like with the story of Babel, the people were now widely scattered over the world. The narrator of the story adds that this explains the many different centers of population, the many tribes, and the many languages. Before the flood, there was but one center, for all the people lived together in one country and spoke one language. They did not know where the other people lived, or probably thought themselves the only survivors. Long afterwards, when in their wanderings they met people from another place, they spoke different languages and could not understand one another.
An Iroquois story tells of the god Tarian-Yawagan, holder of the heavens, guiding his people on a journey and directing them to settle in different places whence their languages changed. May as well take the next one, Mickey.
Yes.
Oh, I'll take it. A Salishman myth tells how an argument led to the divergence of languages. Two people were arguing whether the high-pitched humming noise that accompanies ducks in flight is from air passing through the beak or from the flapping of wings. The argument is not settled by the chief, who then calls a council for all of the leading people from nearby villages. This council breaks down in an argument when no one or nobody can agree. And eventually, the dispute leads to a split, where some people move far away. Over time, they slowly begin to speak differently, and eventually, other languages were formed.
Yeah. Again, a conflict. There's a conflict. There's there's a call coming. It's interesting. Sorry, my phone. Let me just hang up on that. And it's gone. Good. Sorry. No, but my point here is, again, it's conflict. There's an argument, and the argument leads to the breakdown of communications, right? So again, there's the memory of conflict. In this case, a completely inane argument. And maybe that's really at the heart of some of these myths as well. Maybe what happened was such an inane thing, but it had such wide-reaching ramifications. Mexico is an interesting one. Traces of a somewhat similar story have also been met with among the Mongolian Tharos in the north of India, and according to Dr. Livingston, among the Africans of Lake Nganu. The ancient Estonians had a similar myth, which they called the cookings of languages. So also had the ancient inhabitants of the continent of Australia. The story that was found among the ancient Mexican was related as follows. Those with their descendants who were saved from the deluge, which destroyed all mankind except the few saved in the ark, resolved to build a tower which would reach to the skies. The object of this was to see what was going on in heaven, and also to have a place of refuge in case of another deluge. The job was superintended by one of the 7 who were saved from the flood. He was a giant called Jehula, named the architect. Jehula ordered bricks to be made in the province of Tlamanalako, at the foot of the Sierra of Kokotl, and to be conveyed to Cholula, where the tower was to be built. For this purpose he placed a file of men reaching from the Sierra to Cholula, who passed the bricks from hand to hand. The gods beheld with wrath this edifice, the top of which was nearing the clouds, and were much irritated at the daring attempt of Jehula. They therefore hurled fire from heaven upon the pyramid, which threw it down and killed many of the workmen. The work was then discontinued, as each family interested in the building of the tower received a language of their own, and the builders could not understand each other. Now, this is what Dr. Delitzsch has to say. And he must have been astonished when he came across this legend, because he says the following. Actually, the Mexicans had a legend of a tower building as well as of a flood. Jehula, one of the 7 giants rescued from the flood, built the Great Pyramid of Cholula in order to reach heaven, until the gods, angry at his audacity, threw fire upon the building and broke it down, whereupon every separate family received a language of its own. The ancient Mexicans pointed to the ruins of a tower at Cholula as evidence of the truth of their story. The tower was seen by Humboldt and Lord Kingsborough and described by them. We may say then, together with what Dr. Kalish said, that most of the ancient nations possessed myths concerning impious giants who attempted to storm heaven, either to share it with the immortal gods or to expel them from it. In some of these fables, the confusion of tongues is represented as the punishment inflicted by the deities for such wickedness, Dave. That's astounding. I think that's amazing stuff.
It sure is. In California, up to this time, everybody spoke the same language. The people were having a burning. Everything was ready for the next day, when in the night, everybody suddenly began to speak a different language. Each man and his wife, however, spoke the same. Earth Initiate had come in the night to Cusco. Is that right? Cusco. And had told him about it all and given him instructions for the next day. So when the morning came, Cusco called all the people together, for he was able to speak all their languages. He told them each the names of the different animals, etc., in their languages, taught them how to cook and to hunt, gave them all their laws, and set the time for all their dances and festivals. Then he called each tribe by name and sent them off in different directions, telling them where they were to live. He sent the warriors to the north, the singers to the west, the flute players to the east, and the dancers to the south. So all the people went away and left Cusco and his wife alone in Tardioku. And that was from Dixon, 1902, pages 44 to 45. In the mythology of Yuki, indigenous people in California, a creator accompanied by Coyote, creates languages and he creates the tribes in various localities. He lays sticks, which will transform into people upon daybreak. Then follows a long journey of the creator, still accompanied by Quixote, in the course of which he makes tribes in different localities, in each case by laying sticks in the house overnight, gives them their customs and mode of life, and each their language. That's about the last one we'll get through, Mackie. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yes, I know, and it really is, and something again is being remembered here. So we've spoken about the flood, some kind of cataclysm. We need to be very mindful of this. Once again, we're talking about giants. We're talking about the race before the flood, and then also the survivors. This like he was one of the 7 giants that survived the flood. Yeah, and there's the music. So don't go anywhere, guys. There's going to be a roundtable with Trevor, I'm sure. But next week we're going to be back with more of this.
Take care.